afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on this co-hosted webinar between the four associations listed on the screen. Great. Before we get started, my name is Martha Alvarez with ACSA, the Association of California School Administrators, and I'll be spending a few minutes in the next slide introducing our next speakers as well. But I'll do a few housekeeping reminders. We appreciate your engagement this afternoon talking about the new state accountability system and the different components, including the state indicators. And specifically, today we'll be talking about the local performance indicators. But on the housekeeping items, we really want it to be an engaging discussion. We want it to be interactive. We hope that you'll engage through the chat box that you see on the right hand of the screen. If you have any questions, comments that we can convey to the State Board of Education as they continue to modify the system, we welcome that feedback that we can provide to them over the next several weeks. You will be able to download documents for the webinar on both our website at the ACSA website and also perhaps the Partners Association's website in the future. And then you can also download the documents, the PowerPoint, the local performance indicators, reference, and a few other resources through the WebEx when you signed in. And lastly, the recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow on the ACSA website, which is acsa.org/grwebinar. So with that, we appreciate, we'll have a little bit more than 150 participants this afternoon, perhaps close to 200. And we really want to thank our partners, the three associations listed here on the screen. With me right now, I have Efrain Mercado from the County Superintendents Association, and then we'll be having Sarah Batches from the Association of School Business Officials joining us shortly after, followed by Terry Burns from the California School Board Association. We're very pleased about this collaboration between the associations, getting input from you, from the stakeholders, school administrators, business officials, county superintendent officials, and governing board members as we try to understand what this new accountability system will look like for the local level. So with that, we'll get started on the purpose of the webinar. But before we get there, we have a couple of questions we want to know from you to see who you are, who's the audience listening to us today. So if you could please spend a few minutes, probably less than 30 minutes to a minute, 30 seconds to a minute answering this question. We want to hear who's in the audience, who's engaging with us this afternoon. More seconds to answer the question. And again, the purpose of the webinar is to be able to update you on what's happening here in Sacramento from the different perspectives of the association, but also to be able to take feedback from you, both comments, questions, concerns you may have about the accountability system, specifically looking at the local performance indicators. But it's also important to know who you are. We want to know, how many small school districts we might have, how many board members or superintendents, county officials, business officials we might have. So thank you for taking the time to answer this question. With that, we'll move on to the actual content of the presentation. Okay. So these are the three items we'll be covering today. As I mentioned before, the State Board of Education adopted the new accountability system at the September meeting. Really the focus will be on the second piece of it. But as you might know, there's the state indicators, which are those LCFF priorities where the state has been collecting data that will be aggregated at the local level by LEA, by school type, by subgroup level. And then there's also the other LCFF remaining priorities, which are referred to as the local performance priorities or indicators. And we want to get feedback on that from you today. That we'll be reviewing those individual priorities and then asking for those comments that you might have so that the State Board can be able to then make a decision or recommendation at the State Board meeting in November. Okay. So I think it's really important to think about the interaction and the engagement between the LCAP, the new LCFF evaluation rubrics, and how both of these components apply to the role of the county superintendent's office will have in determining and helping school districts with any support or assistance they might need, as well as the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence role in this process. What you have here is a diagram that shows the process between what happens in July after school districts, the governing board members approve the LCAP by July 1st. They submit it to the county officials in the local region. And then the whole goal about this interaction with the evaluation rubrics is that by sometime in the fall, there'll be information about your student performance data, any progress that has been made during that past year, and any performance gaps that might exist within your subgroups. That you'll be able to look at the data in the fall, and that will inform the local stakeholder engagement process that happens in the early winter to early spring, so that really that information about your student groups can help inform your decisions about local priorities, your action services, and how you spend the local resources. And so that's meant, this representation is meant to give you that idea of how these will all play together in the coming year. And as you know, the state board is currently considering making revisions to the LCAP, which will be adopted at the November meeting, and there will also be, they'll go into effect in the 17-18 cycle. This is the purpose of the evaluation rubrics, just to give you an idea, sort of an overview of which is the requirement of the LCFF statute. It's really to measure the 8 different state priorities. Under California law, all of them are equally important, all 8 of them. So looking as to what's the performance for each of them and how are we doing to support students holistically. That's the second point, being a multidimensional picture or idea about how we're supporting and making sure that kids have access to a quality public education. And then lastly, this is where the interaction happens between the local school districts. This will be an opportunity for the school districts to identify their own strengths, weaknesses, and areas of improvement for both the local educational agencies, charter schools, or county offices of education. Beyond that, the local self-assessment. The other purpose of this is for the county offices to identify districts or charter schools that may need additional technical assistance if they're not making enough progress from one year to the next. And then lastly, the third purpose of the rubrics is for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, the CCEE, to be able to identify, with the support of the state superintendent, any districts or county offices that may need additional intervention and support. Okay, a few slides to that. All right. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's a difference between the state indicators and the local performance indicators. And for the purpose of this afternoon, we'll be focusing on the local performance indicators. But before we get there with the other co-hosts, we wanted to just give you a quick brief update or information about what is a state indicator. So those are the state metrics where we have collected data that there's evidence-based, there's research behind the metric. The state has been able to collect that information from the state. It's disaggregated by student groups. And so this is what a state indicator will be, and we'll have a slide following that shows you what those state indicators are. And this also helps identify those districts, charter schools, or county offices that may need the support, the differentiated assistance, or intensive state-directed intervention as well. And what the state board adopted at the September meeting just 2 weeks ago are these 5 indicators that you see on here. Actually, the first one, students test scores looking at English, language, arts, and math. That will be adopted at the November meeting, but it will be one of those. The state board is still looking at the student growth between the 2015 and the 2016 assessment test scores for the SBAC, and so they'll have that information available in the next month and a half. But there will be a focus as much as the test scores, but what's really important to notice about the new system is that we're looking at a holistic system. So we have other multiple measures. As you see on the screen, we're looking at the progress of English language learners, as well as high school graduation rate for a 4-year cohort, suspension rates for local educational agency, and by school type. And then lastly, there's a new interest, renewed interest in California in ensuring that kids are college and career ready by looking at several different indicators. So what you have on the screen are those state priorities, again, that we have the data collected at the state level. What we'll be talking about in the next hour, an hour or 15 minutes, will be those indicators that are not, we currently do not have state collected information. So what you have here is the methodology for those remaining LCFF priorities. They'll be measured in a variety of ways. For example, it could be a survey, whether it be for school climate as an example, and Sarah will be going more into, or Sarah will be going into details a little bit later. But it might be the California Healthy Kids Survey, self-assessment narrative, or polling questions. This information will be locally self-reported. Each of you will have the opportunity to continue to collect that information at the local level. And there'll be basically a questionnaire. Did you meet the standard for that priority? Did you not meet it for 1 or more years? Or did you not meet it for 2 or more years? The idea that this information will be collected over the next several years and would become available to the state by 2019-20. And so for the purpose of this, for today, we will be asking you this Okay, so for all of these different priorities that I mentioned that are not part of the state indicator, so that will be priorities number 1, number 2, number 3, 5, 6, 9, and 10. This will be the 3 criteria that will be used for determining performance categories for each of them. There will be a standard, sort of what is the baseline for where everyone needs to be for each of those indicators. It will be measuring your annual progress on each of them. There will be a requirement to think about any evidence. Can you show or demonstrate that you're meeting that progress for that particular priority? And then lastly, I mentioned the criteria. There will just be 1 of 3. Either you met it, you did not meet it for 1 year, or you did not meet it for 2 or more years. So before turning over to Efren and starting with the actual priorities, again, we want it to be engaging. We will be asking polling questions throughout the webinar, and we'll get started with a couple of questions in the next 2 minutes. Take the time to answer these questions as we hope to collect information to be able to share with the Department of Education and the State Board of Education staff. Let's see. So question number 1, what are other ways your districts are currently collecting and reporting this information? Is anything missing from the list of examples? We want this to be as thorough as possible, so if you have written examples, comments, we want to know what is currently being used by the field. So please type in your comments, questions in the chat box. Should there be, question number 2, should there be an open-ended box for LEAs to complete to explain the evidence for meeting the local performance standards? Or should there be a menu of options and LEAs to select an X number of metrics? So for example, should it just be an open box where you just type whatever you want? Or should there be a drop-down box where districts have the opportunity to select, let's say, 2 out of 10 options? We want to hear what you think is best. And then the next question, at what point in time should the data be collected and reported? There's 5 options there, multiple points throughout the year, at the beginning of the school year, halfway through the year, at the end of the academic year, or does it matter to you? And this question really comes down to, you want to be able to collect information across the state. Does it matter that there might be a district collecting at the beginning of the year versus someone else who might collect it at middle through the year? So if you have any perspective, let us know through this polling question. And also, if there's any other comments you might have that are beyond this question, please do use the chat box to provide your comments or questions. Besides collecting feedback from you, we also want to be able to build a number of questions that may need clarification from the Department of Education so we can help the field understand the new system better.
I'm hoping that I'm doing this right. Sorry. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mercado. I'm the Policy Director at the California County Superintendent Association. Really happy to be here with our partners ACSA, CASBO, and CSBA. It's wonderful to get the practitioner point of view and be able to share this information with the State Board of Education. I'm going to be handling initially the first priority 1, which most folks consider to be the Williams priority, having to do with the appropriately assigned teachers, the access to the curriculum line instructional materials, and then having the safe and clean facilities. When it comes to this, I'm not so good at the clicker, so thank you. When it comes to this priority, in most folks' mind, it's a pretty straightforward component with the basic services. The major questions that have to be asked with this one, in terms of the standard and the evidence base, is the LEA measuring the progress of meeting the settlement requirements? And essentially what they're asking is, do you know if you have teachers that are misassigned, and are you correcting that? Same thing with the sufficiency of materials, and then the safe and clean facilities. Are you reporting this information, and then also are you sharing it with your public? For the most part, this is covered by the SART currently, the School Accountability Report Card. So the questions that we really have for this group will have to do with, is that good enough? And considering that San Joaquin County Office of Education is developing the backbone of the LCFF evaluation rubrics, and they're also the group that handles the SART. And if that information is pre-populated, would that work out for the LEA? And is there other information that you want to share under this priority? There has been a discussion regarding the HQT requirement underneath priority 1. So if there's any feedback on that, that'd be fantastic. But at this point, the question really is, will the information from the SART fulfill this information? And, define HQT, sorry. Highly qualified teacher, we know that with the passage of ESSA, that is no longer in place, but there are places in state statute where that still is kind of left over, or I don't know the correct term for that, but it's still in place in some places in statute or ed code, so how we deal with that. But you see on the screen here some examples of things that districts can do. We all know that under Williams, your goal is 100%. So essentially, are you reporting the information from your SART to your stakeholders and to your school board? And then if you do that, then essentially you would be met for this priority. In terms of the feedback from the group, questions may be, is that enough? Is there more that you need? We also know that currently the grandfathering in of the schools that were in the bottom 3 deciles, they will continue to have county office site visits for Williams requirements, and that will be happening for the foreseeable future. But are there ideas around that as well as you move into this new accountability system with the evaluation rubrics and the alignment to ESSA? So we want to get that information out. And also on this priority, again, to go back to the original poll questions, would this be best measured in the beginning of the school year, a couple times throughout, or at the end? So we want to make sure to get that feedback from this group.
I think we do have the polling questions again.
And sorry, Martha, there's one more thing I just wanted to bring up for folks to consider, is that under the instructional materials, we know there's been a lot of questions lately regarding the online materials and whether that means efficiency or not for students who go home and don't have Wi-Fi access. So that may be something else that we need to really explore and really dive into. So while this priority does seem rather straightforward, we'd love to hear the feedback. If you need to put it in the chat box, are there any other things that the state board should be considering as they build the standard and the evidence for this priority? So thank you, Martha.
Sure. So we have the questions again that Efren pointed out before. Question number 1, what else? Do you want to mention the questions?
Oh, thank you. Yes. I'm getting older, so my eyesight's not as good. Okay. What are the other ways your districts are currently collecting and reporting the information? Is anything missing from the list of examples? And then also, at what point in time should the data be collected and reported? So if you could answer those for us, then we'll make sure to be able to collate this and can get over to the state board. That'd be great. And also, if you have any specific suggestions that you want to type into the chat box or send via email to Martha, that'd also be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for that, Efren. And we'll have Evan coming back in a few slides later to talk about priorities number 9 and 10 that affect the County Office of Education. So I think we're ready for priority number 2.
Perfect.
So thank you for that feedback. I think you were given 1 minute to complete the question number 1. This next priority is number 2, which has to do with the implementation of the state standards. Okay, there it is, implementation of the state standards. So it's important to keep in mind that when we talk about the state standards, we're not just talking about Common Core data standards, we're talking about the next generation science standards as well. And I think the NGSS is also important because we oftentimes just hear Common Core references without thinking about the next generation science standards being part of the system in the upcoming couple of years. So for this first priority number 2, it's thinking about any progress the school districts are making, charter schools or county offices are making in implementing the state academic standards that I just mentioned. This would be also an annual measurement to see the progress that you're making. That could include the self-assessment or any other tools that could help you measure your progress. Okay. So here's a couple of examples. Let's go back to the prior slide. Okay, here are a few examples of the ways that you can show the progress you're making on the state standards. These are just 2 examples. Again, if you have other examples you want to for us for the state board to consider as to how to show progress, please type in the chat box. But just to go over these 2 examples that the state board has come up with. How would you rate the strength of the district's progress in implementing the California's new standards in the following areas? How would you rate the preparedness of the following districts and school staff to implement California's English language arts, English language development, mathematics, and science standards? So this would be questions that would be posed to the field. It might be not yes or no answer, or doing good, good progress, getting there, or maybe not quite met. Do you have any ideas of other ways to measure that progress for the implementation of the standards? Another question I would ask, do you think we should be asking for how is that, are you providing professional development to the teachers or the administrators to be able to better deliver the content? Are you providing instructional materials that are aligned to the Common Core and next generation science standards? So any questions or feedback you think that should be asked as part of this priority number 2 would be helpful. And similarly to the other priority, we have a few questions that we want to ask of you. The questions, for example, starting out with number 1, what are other ways your districts are currently collecting and reporting this information? Is anything missing from the list of examples? Again, you can type in your answers in the box. Question number 2, at what point in time should the data be collected and reported? Similar to the prior question, should it be at multiple times throughout the year? Should it be at the beginning of the school year, at the end of the school year, or it doesn't matter when you collect that information? Question number 3, should LEAs, local educational agencies, rate preparedness separately or in a combined single rating for English language arts, mathematics, English language development, or science, or does it matter? Should it be, again, together? Should it be separately, or does it matter? And then lastly, there's maybe a couple more questions beneath number 4. Should the ranking be based on percentage, self-determined, explicitly set standards, or does it not matter? So any feedback you have on this would be really greatly appreciated as we think about how do we collect that data and how do you as school districts locally report this information both to your school governing board members, to your other teachers and stakeholders, parents, as well as reporting it to the principals on your school site and ultimately to the state level. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer these questions, and then we'll have Sarah continue on and talk about priority number 3, which is parent engagement. And And we also, as a reminder, if you have any questions if you would like us to try to answer today, or questions we can take back to the State Board of Education that need clarification for the practitioners, for you to understand what this all means to you, please type in your questions and comments as well in the chat box.
Good afternoon. This is Sarah Bachas, Assistant Executive Director of the California Association of School Business Officials. We're very pleased to be here today working on something that's very critical to all our LEAs, county offices of education, and charter schools. I will be focusing on priority 3, parent engagement. It is a very critical priority. We want to emphasize that on this one, we will see a lot of interest from social justice organizations, equity groups, parents, nonprofit organizations, really looking and seeking to ensure that the state is evaluating, that the state is recording and tracking what every LEA, each LEA is doing on parent engagement. Next slide. Oh, is it working? Give this 1 second. So on parent engagement, the standards that the State Board of Education is developing is ensuring that every LEA meets these 2 criteria, not just an either or, but ensuring that the LEAs measure its progress and seeking input from parents in decision-making process, be it as part of the LCFF, LCAP process, as part of your parent engagement stakeholder meetings, English language learning programs, as well as LEAs meeting its progress in promoting parent participation in programs and educational support services for all students. The evidence that will be used in determining if an LEA is meeting progress, it will be part of a self-assessment tool process or a selection of a menu, a drop box with all local measures. In order to collect those local measures that will be part of a menu, drop-down menu process, it is critical for all LEAs to participate in informing the state on what measures and metrics are currently used as part of your LCAP process. That will help determine at the state level how LEAs are including this in meeting priority number 3 as part of the LCAP process. As for the examples that the State Board of Education and the Department of Education are setting, the 3 following examples are listed as part of their guide, that schools and districts have systems and structures in place to provide parents and caregivers with interpretation and translative services as they need to be in order to be full participants in any meetings related to their student educational needs. What % of teachers and administrators have participated in 1 or more professional development opportunities related to engaging parents and caregivers in decision-making processes? And what is the % of parents and caregivers serving on school district committees who report feeling that their input is respected, valued, and reflected as part of an LEA plan? For us, it's very critical that we get enough feedback, particularly in priority 3 and 6, as this will dictate on how the state board assesses the local performance indicator. We're going to open up our polling questions, but please use this time to provide us with any feedback in particular as your LEA is seeking input and demonstrating performance, demonstrating meeting this local priority. We have 3 questions before you. We've allowed it a 2-minute slot to provide as much feedback as possible. If you believe that there's additional information not listed here, please include that in your feedback. This is a priority that is very critical for us participating. We want to ensure that all LEAs have an ability to demonstrate that they are taking this priority in particular very seriously. I'll read off the question. What are other, and the problem is I'm very blind, so pardon my ability to read this far away. What are other ways your districts are currently collecting and reporting this information? Is anything missing from the list of examples that were posted in the website? So let me go back on the slides just to provide those examples so you could have them as you're participating in this poll. Okay. And as we mentioned, we'll be providing all of these slides as well as the feedback. But the questions, the examples that have been provided to us is, do we have systems and structures in place to empower parents to participate? What are the percent of teachers and administrators receiving professional development? Percent of parents that believe that their input is part of the local control accountability system. As for question number 2, at what point in time should this data be collected and reported?
I think as Sarah mentioned, that if there's anything missing and there's other ways that you want to give yourself credit for engaging parents. Thank you, Sarah. If there's other ways that you think we should be engaging parents and want to be able to reflect on that information, do let us know your ideas and thoughts. So now with us, we have Terry Burns from the California School Board Association, who will be talking about priority number 6, which is school climate and local climate survey. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Martha. Glad to be here. Glad that school board members are participating in this effort, as we really are trying to draw out your input and get in at the early stages of development on these priorities. So priority number 6 is school climate. This is for administering local school climate surveys is the best way to get there. And Martha, I'm trusting you're moving that along for me. The idea is you're going to develop and administer a school climate survey to your students to measure their perceptions of school safety and connectedness. The Healthy Kids Survey is one option, but there are a number of other options out there. And when we get to our survey questions, we'll certainly want to ask you which ones you're currently using. The evidence is that you will annually measure the progress, which may include the use of a self-assessment tool or a selection from a menu of items, as we've talked about before. So some examples, you might write a brief narrative description of your findings. You include some differences among different student populations. You might show a survey that has an overall score, something like the School Climate Index for the Healthy Kids Survey. Or you might analyze a number of indicators, be specific about them, and come up with your own assessment of how that is. So lots of different ways of getting at this, and that's where we would really like your input on how to make that happen.
So if we can pause so we can get to the right slide, Terry. I'm having difficulties with this. Okay, clicker. The example that you were mentioning, if you want to outline them again, please.
Sure. A brief narrative description of the key findings in whatever survey you do, including the differences among the different student groups. Second is a survey that provides an overall score. The Healthy Kids Survey does that, gives you an overall score for all students and each of the individual student groups. And then finally, another option is a subset of specific items from a survey. You might not want to get into some of the details that are more private and personal about students, but the data that gives you that information on school safety and connectedness. So I'm the one with a lot of questions on my survey, so don't think you're done with the first 2. If we can advance this, Martha, you might have to touch. So several questions on here. I have a total of 8. The first 2 are the same as they always are. We've given you plenty of time. The first is the issue of what ways are you currently collecting and reporting this information? So are you doing student surveys now? What surveys are you using that would be useful? We've talked about the Healthy Kids Survey. That's something that's out there. A lot of districts are using, but other folks are using other great tools. So please be sure to put them in this chat box, in this survey tool, so that we can share with the board all the good options that are out there. Second question is the usual question of at what point in time should the survey be done? Then I want to get into a little more detail. Should the survey involve all students, or can it be a sample of particular grades? So all students in a particular grade, or a sampling of students from different grades, or all students from a single grade or grade. So how should we break this up? What should qualify? Do you have to survey every child, or how can we do it? Or does it matter? Does it matter what you come up with? The next question 4 is an issue of what should be considered a valid survey. Clearly, if you do a survey of one of your students, that's probably not sufficient. But is it a valid survey if 1% opt out, 5%, 10%, 15%, or does it not matter? Question 5 goes on to ask, so should a survey that also includes adults and parents and staff count if students represent some sizable portion of that survey? Maybe 25%, 50%, 75%, doesn't matter, or no, your survey should definitely be a separate survey strictly of the students. Question 6 is we're trying to consider what the survey should consider. So this is a check all that apply question. If you think it should include safety, bullying, social diversity, access to meals, access to drugs and alcohol on campus, teachers who know me, and then please in number 7, list anything else you think we should be considering here, so that we're getting a well-rounded picture of school climate, anything that we might have missed on this list. Finally, question 8 in this survey is the last question. The state is considering developing a standardized climate survey. We have a number of these surveys out, but should the state develop its own climate survey that everybody's taking? Should it be a mandated survey that we all use? Should the state develop one that they think is good, but it's still voluntary, and you can use whatever good survey that you're already using and you're happy with? Should they not bother to do a climate survey because there are plenty out there? Or it doesn't matter. The state can do what it wants to on this one. So lots of questions on mine, and I'm sorry for the length of my particular questions, but I think it's all important as we decide how we're going to recognize school climate. Much like parent engagement, there are a lot of different ways to look at it, and we want to be sure we're getting it right as we move into this. So thank you very much, and we'll have another couple minutes here to go through this survey. Again, please, if you are using a tool, list it in item 1, a tool that you're happy with, because we know there are a number out there, and we want to be sure that the state board is looking at the real cross-section of tools that folks have.
And I think one really big outstanding question is, to what extent should this information be standardized? That we want to be able to collect the same information from every school district across the state. At what point do we say it's better to have the localized information that you have your own individual students? You get to collect the information that you want. So I think that's one remaining question that we don't have an answer for. Do we really want to standardize? We want to keep it more localized. And then the other piece, too, is that the State Department of Education is currently engaging a local climate working group. So they do have other stakeholders and practitioners providing feedback.
Looking at this question, right? Very true. So while you're finishing this, if we can also put up the slide. We know some of you are anxious to get out because you were trying to do this on your lunch hour, and so if you are not sticking around for the final 2 county office questions, our data is up here and you can reach any of us for more information. We also want to remind you to sign up as district teams if you can, as parents, administrators, school board members, to come together and sign up for the CCEE rubric training that are happening around the state all through November. Please keep track on your association's website. We are all working very hard to keep the latest and greatest information about the rubrics and the template caught up for all of our members. So check our websites on that. And finally, the practitioners group, the CPAG, is meeting this Thursday. They are going over a draft of what some of these indicators might look like. That draft is available on the website of the State Board, and that meeting on Thursday will be live streamed on the CDE website, so you're welcome to watch that as well. So,
before we go on to the county office priorities, number 9 and 10, we want to also use an opportunity. If you do have any questions about the beginning, we talked about the state indicators very briefly at the beginning. Any questions about that or comments you have on the local performance indicators, do use the chat box. I think so far we only see 2 comments from the public. The first comment, I do not feel like we have sufficient background or to answer these 12 questions. This could be handled through a dialogue. We will have the opportunity to share with you after the webinar. We have the draft that Terry just mentioned, the draft of the self-assessment tool that the State Board and Department of Education have drafted that the CPAC will be looking at this Thursday. We'll be forwarding that to you sometime this afternoon or tomorrow, more likely tomorrow. And that way you can have more time to thoroughly look at the information. You can email any of us, the 4 of us on this screen, with any feedback you might have, any comments or questions you may have. So we really want this to just be an introduction to the conversation for you to feel that you are getting up to speed as to what's happening here in Sacramento that has an impact on you at the local level. So,
and as you pointed out, Martha, there are a number of different venues that the State Board is soliciting information from. They have working groups, the CPAG is out there, we're coming in, we're collecting data from all of our members to share. So a lot of venues going on for this.
And the second comment or question was, what about addressing the art, music, and PE standards implementation? My understanding is for the initial part is really thinking about all of the standards. I mentioned Common Core, Next Generation Science standards, and when we do have adopted standards for art, music, and PE, that would be incorporated as well.
Absolutely. You could certainly address it in those. That is certainly part of how you will self-identify what you're doing. Remember, all of these are locally assessed, and you will determine whether you have met or have not met these standards as your statement set, and you will show your evidence on the form.
And there's some more comments and questions about the climate survey. Do you want to take those, Terry?
Sure. And a survey would be very useful. Questioning. Okay, how will the survey information be used? You are going to use that locally. The state is going to look at your data, and you're going to say, we have done the survey, here are the results of our survey, and thus we have met the criteria that we survey students. So you will self-certify that you have met the standard once you have done the survey and reported the results out, both on the rubric and to your board and your community. So you don't get to hide the survey results. You need to report them out as part of this process. But you can, right now, you can pick any survey that you're choosing, and however you want to go through the process of doing that, might be an online survey you do with your students, a handwritten survey, whatever your process is.
And I think there's thank you for that, Terry. There's other comments about getting this information to all of you participants today for you to be able to look at this information more carefully and be more thoughtful about responses you might have. So like I mentioned before, we'll follow up with all of the participants. We have over 175 of you with us today and close to 300 have signed up for the webinar. So our intent is to follow up after today with the information about the draft of the self-assessment tools, for you to be able to take a look at it more carefully, give us more input. This will not be decided on in the next week or two or month. The State Board will have an opportunity to have a conversation in November at the board meeting. So there's a couple more weeks, I think, for you to be able to provide feedback both to us and to the State Board of Education. So with that, if you do have other comments or questions or concerns, do list them on the chat box. We want to hear from you as much as possible. And if you are interested in the priorities number 9 or 10, which have to do with foster youth and expelled students, then please stick around, especially if you're from a county office and if you want to know more about the student population. Definitely stay for this portion where Efren will be talking about those 2 priorities.
Thank you, Martha. And one more note for this, too, that the whole point of the local performance indicators is not for the LEA to have to do one more thing. The idea is how can this survey or these tools for the priorities be useful for the community, for the stakeholders, but also within your internal planning processes. So I want to make sure that's not lost, and as we go forward to the county priorities as well, we want to really emphasize that.
And before we turn it over to Efren, I'll just make one last thank you to those who are going to be logging off soon. I'll mention that ACSA will be doing 2 other webinars in October and November regarding the ESSA state plan, as well as the educational collaborative for educational excellence, and thinking about the role of supporting local capacity building. If you want to sign up for those webinars or participate, you can go to ACSA's website, ACSA.org/GR webinars, or contact one of us and we'll give you the information for that information. But on behalf of the 4 organizations today, thank you for those who joined the first portion of the webinar, and then we'll spend the remaining of the time on priorities 9 and 10. Thank you, Efren. Perfect,
thank you. Again, appreciate everyone's time today. My name is Efren Mercado. I'm Policy Director for the California County Superintendent Association. As you know, the priorities 9 and 10 are dealt with exclusively by the counties, by the county superintendent, the county boards, and they deal with the student populations of expelled students and then the foster youth. Two extremely important student groups that are also very vulnerable, so this work becomes even that much more important. So we wanted to kind of to reemphasize the idea that for local performance indicator for priority 9 and for priority 10, we'll talk about priority 9 right now, the idea of how will this be beneficial to the county office, not only internally for your planning purposes as you construct your LCAP and move forward, but also to your community and your stakeholder groups. So it's going to be really important emphasis for our work. As you know, TCEPA, all 58 county superintendents, we have a steering committee called the Student Programs and Services Steering Committee, called FPSSC. They're heavily involved with this work on our end, and they do a great job of providing feedback. Folks like Roger Rice from Ventura County, Carmen Barner from Kings County, Diana Walsh-Royce from Riverside County, and a number of others who are intimately involved. So if there's more feedback that you guys want to share, please send it over to either myself, Martha, Terry, or Sarah, and we'll make sure to coordinate and get that information over to state board and also internally to our groups. I'm going to dive into now to priority 9, the coordination of services for expelled students. As you know, the county offices across the state run the juvenile court and community schools, and this is a very vulnerable population. And the idea here that the county office annually measures its progress in coordinating instruction services to all expelled students in that county. And then in terms of the evidence, the county office shall annually measure its progress, which may include use of a self-assessment tool or selection for a menu of local measures. One of the pieces that TCEPA and the student programs folks are really going through is identifying a survey tool, but also the other local metrics that are currently in place, knowing that the population of student will come in for a certain amount of time and then be re-entered into the traditional school system. How are we doing that? How do we coordinate both services? How do we work with school districts and across the county, the county structure? And you'll see some examples on the screen right now. So to assess the status of the required plan for providing education services to all expelled pupils in the county, including most recent triennial updates and required outcome data, assess the extent of the coordination on plan development and implementation within the county, and then assess progress in identifying existing educational alternatives for expelled pupils, gaps in educational services to expelled pupils, and strategies for filling those service gaps. These priorities will be especially key for county offices initially because the alternative schools in our state were pulled out of the structure for the state indicators, were pulled out of the data set. So a lot of information for the counties will be relying upon priority 9 and priority 10. So this work will be extremely important. So again, if you have thoughts on how to do this and how potential surveys or other components will not only help to inform stakeholders, but ultimately help with the work internally, please feel free to share it and then respond to the poll here. And understand that the nature of this priority is likely going to mean that the multiple points to check in because students come in and come out and the services are pretty fast-paced. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that, and please feel free to send your feedback. The poll will begin. If you can answer to the poll question, that would be fantastic. Another point to really feature here, if there are things that we're not bringing up right now that you feel need to be brought up for this discussion, for this priority, please feel free to either email it in or put it in the chat box. We really want to take all these components back to the state board and to state board staff, and to allow us to have a really robust discussion to really help these students and to help the county offices and the county boards to really provide the best services possible to these students. So we're going to give you your time, which I believe is almost up for the poll. Perfect. And now we'll be able to move on to priority 10. A very similar situation in terms of the county office priority, but the idea here of how can a county office best measure its progress and coordinate educational services for foster youth. We know foster youth is a part of the unpaid students pieces under LCFF, but the idea that we know, again, that this is a very vulnerable student population, so how do we best coordinate these services across the different agencies within a county, and the county office role in that is an essential structure. We hear from our colleagues all the time in the foster youth community around the importance of having the advocate at the county office to help coordinate the different county level pieces. So how can we best go about measuring those efforts and then ultimately impacting the plans that occur at the county level? And you'll see the examples here on the screen. Assess the degree of implementation of coordinated service program components for foster youth in your county, establishing ongoing collaboration and policy development, including establishing formalized information sharing agreements with the child welfare, probation, LDAs, the courts, and other organizations to determine the proper educational placement for foster youth, and then building the capacity and then providing information to the LDAs. Historically, there was a great presentation the other day by a lady from the foster ed group regarding the information that before the data availability that we have today was in place, there were many LDAs that did not know who was a foster youth within their system, and now we have much better data capabilities, and now we have to leverage that across the entire county with the different agencies and institutions. So what are some good ways for us to do this work and to really assess the effectiveness in our communication, but more importantly to reiterate, not just doing another survey or another checklist, but the idea of how does this help us to plan at the county level for county office of education staff, county superintendents, and county board members to really plan for the work moving forward for the county LCAP. And with that, we're going to transition into the poll. Very similar poll questions, so we really want to see if there are questions that come over the chat box or, again, email us. That'd be fantastic. We'll take all this information back to the state board. Go back to Martha.
Thank you, Efren. So definitely, if you have any comments or questions, I think there might have been a question on the chat box beforehand, but we'll wait into the poll, and that was related to a county office question.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, if you're from a county office and you have specific questions or suggestions, please shoot me an email, and I'll help to connect you with Roger Rice from SBE to help deepen that discussion and move that forward.
So the question was from Manuel. What influence will county offices have in determining if a specific action is meeting the goal, or will be a district community decision?
Well, with that question, I don't think there's a simple answer to that. It's probably likely to be where all three are coming together and really determining that piece. But the idea here is how do we help propel a proactive discussion for these services and for these efforts? So how do we make sure that the different groups are on the same page and able to really best serve these students? I don't believe it's about necessarily determining whether the action is meeting the goal and who gets to decide that, but the idea of how do you do that collectively as you move forward. I think it's the whole essential tenet of local control and the idea of stakeholder engagement.
And as Terry mentioned, just one reminder, there will be that collaborative, the CCE training starting in November, both for the county offices, charter schools, and school districts, and different stakeholders, parents, governing board members, administrators throughout the state, in thinking about how to better align the LCAP work with the new evaluation rubrics data that'll be coming out in the next couple of months. So there'll be additional information, trainings to the field that'll be available for free, so you can be better informed about the new processes in place. So with that, unless there's any other questions, we'll leave the chat box open in case any other comments or questions people may have. But we'll follow up then through an email with the information about the draft self-assessment tool in case people have additional comments or questions. But thank you to our partners, CASBO, SBE, and CSBA, for joining us today, and thank you to those of you who